All right, everybody, welcome back to Boulder Uphill. I'm your host, Brian Whitehill. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to. If you're returning here, welcome back. This is episode 4. I can't believe we made it here, but we're here, and I'm still very excited about this. And if you're new here, this is the show where we, number 1, find comedy in shared misery. Number 2, we discuss trending topics occasionally, and number 3. What's number 3? I should know it because I have a whole tagline for it. Number 3 is we reflect on the uphill battles of pursuing a bold and creative life. So that's what the show is. Welcome to and back. I got up at 7 a.m. this morning, so I'm surprisingly not dead tired right now. I get up at 7 a.m. maybe 4 times a year. Literally the last time I looked at the alarm clock label of the last time I woke up at 7 a.m. and it was for what was it for? It was for a Golden Globes event that I worked because I worked the Golden Globes and I passed out drinks to a lot of famous people. But today I got up at 7 a.m. because I did in honor of Memorial Day and in honor of Naval Lieutenant Michael P. Murphy, I did the Murph workout, which is it's the first I've ever heard of it. It's very big in the CrossFit community, but it's also a tradition that a lot of people do every year for Memorial Day, and it's intense. It was my first time doing this workout, and what is it? It's you do a 1 mile run, and then 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, and then another 1 mile run, and so I did that with my friend Max from high school, who is in the Marine Corps. And so a big old shout out to Max for that. I know you're watching or listening, because that guy is a badass, and massive respect for him for doing what he's doing. And it was great to see him. We had dinner the other night, 2 nights ago, and then we both woke up. Well, he's used to waking up early, I'm sure. I'm the wuss over here that's like, oh man, we're working out at 8 a.m.? I don't know. And he was like up at 5 today. So anyway, that was a blast, and I'm glad I did that. So I have a surprising amount of energy right now. Come 3 o'clock, probably gonna nap. We'll see. But a lot to talk about today, guys. It's so fun hanging out with Max. He's as much of a comic book nerd as I am. We literally talked for an hour today and then like a few hours the other night about like the state of comic book movies, superhero movies, and all that stuff. And it's crazy. It's all heading in a very interesting direction. And for those of you, and this is some exciting news. Speaking of trending topics, this news came out last week. And for those of you that don't know anything about the Snyder Cut, some of you might have seen the announcement that the Snyder Cut of the Justice League is going to be released. And for those of you that don't know what that means, it's very exciting because, and I'll tell you why, and I promise you, it's a cool story. And even if you don't know anything about superhero movies, you're going to be seeing these announcements and possibly not understanding what it means. So the story of the Justice League, the mishaps of the movie, and what the Snyder Cut means, it's exciting. Because, so essentially, when the Avengers started back in 2008 with Iron Man, DC, so there's Marvel and there's DC. And so DC, and Marvel has the Avengers. DC has the Justice League, which is Batman, Superman, Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, some other people. So DC at that time was like playing catch up to Marvel's team up movie, because the Avengers was like a revolutionary thing. The Marvel Cinematic Universe was a revolutionary thing at the time, to have a big shared universe. So DC was still finishing up the Dark Knight trilogy that Christopher Nolan was directing with Christian Bale as Batman. Badass movies. So great. But because they were still working on those, they weren't able to be as quick to the jump of following in the footsteps of the Avengers and creating a team up movie. So what they did after Dark Knight trilogy, they tapped Zack Snyder to kick off their universe. And I promise you, this is cool. This is cool. I love it. And so they tapped Zack Snyder, and they were like, kick this stuff off. And so Zack Snyder, he makes Man of Steel with Henry Cavill as Superman, right? And then the next one was Batman versus Superman. So they introduced Batman into the universe. And then, what was the next one? The next one was maybe Wonder Woman, maybe Suicide Squad, then Wonder Woman, then something else. Anyway, they were all rushing. DC was rushing to make a team up movie, which was too quick because they hadn't introduced all the characters yet. Like where Marvel took their time to introduce the characters before they had them team up. So DC was rushing. And so by the time that they got around to the Justice League, it was a jumbled mess because Zack Snyder had to leave the project for a variety of reasons. Number one, there was a tragedy in his family, so that he obviously had to spend time with his family. But then number two, executives at DC weren't enjoying the direction he was going with the movies because he was taking a very dark cinematic take on the movies and on the heroes. And apparently they like watched a cut of his movie and they were like, yeah, we got to go a different direction. So after he left the project, they brought in Joss Whedon, the director of the Avengers and Avengers 2 and a bunch of other amazing projects, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And he's very, the list goes on. He's done far more than that stuff, but he's very good at ensemble building and team building. So DC was like, oh, naturally, we got to bring Joss Whedon into this because he can inject some humor. He can like really mold this project into more of a marketable movie. Bad decision, because what the Justice League ended up being, and the Justice League I want to say was released in 2017 or 2018, what it ended up being was half Zack Snyder's movie and half Joss Whedon's movie, completely conflicting tones. You could tell which scenes were reshot, and you could tell which ones had the lighter tone versus, one scene, Batman is like joking, or Bruce Wayne's joking around with someone, and the next scene it's like dark and gritty. And so there was just such a disconnect. Also because Zack Snyder's cut was done, and then 6 to 8 months later, all these actors were tapped to come back and reshoot this. So many scenes of this movie, so much money was dropped. They just like changed the movie completely. That was the whole mustache gate, where I noticed this the second Justice League started. I was like, Henry Cavill's mouth and face looks messed up. What's going on here? Turns out he was in the middle of filming his Mission Impossible movie. I want to say it was called Fallout. Another badass movie. So good. You got to see it. He was in the middle of filming that, and he had a mustache in that. And so Warner Brothers was like, hey, can you come back and shoot some Superman stuff for us? And the executives of Mission Impossible, they were like, he's not shaving his mustache. We need him for, it's just such a weird argument. He's not shaving his mustache. We need him for this movie. And then he filmed Superman scenes with a mustache, and then they digitally altered the mustache out. Anyway, the movie was, in my opinion, and I went in and I wanted it to be so good. I wanted it to be good. I went in with no expectations, even though I was expecting something bad because I already knew all the behind-the-scenes drama. I went in with no expectations. I wanted to love it, and I didn't. So the exciting thing about what's happening right now is that Zack Snyder is being brought back to essentially finish his vision, which, love it or hate it, because fans have been divided over his vision. I'm half and half. I liked Man of Steel. Batman vs. Superman had some amazing moments, some miscasts, and some missed moments. But I want Zack Snyder's vision to be complete so I can see what he envisioned for the Justice League. And that to me is so exciting. And I'm telling you guys, it's going to be cool. And they're releasing it on HBO Max, which is a good decision for Warner Brothers, because yet another streaming service, because we already have 15 to 20 separate streaming services. So HBO now is going to have another one called HBO Max, where they're going to be releasing their original content that's separate from HBO, the channel. I don't know, something like that. All I know is I'm going to hop on that free trial the second that the Justice League is re-released to see what that thing is, because they're bringing the actors back. It's going to be crazy. And I'm so excited about it. And me and Max talked at length about it. And I've talked to other people about it too. But the direction that DC is going with this stuff is going to be great because for the longest time, and especially post Joker with Joaquin Phoenix, directed by Todd Phillips, for the longest time, DC was really trying to emulate Marvel and like, because Marvel has kind of a lighter tone for the most part, and DC has the darker tone. And that's just how it's been for a long time, especially in the comics as well, and that's okay. But because they saw the success of the Avengers, DC was like, we got to emulate that. And they missed the mark. And that's also not where their strong suit lies. But I will say, I saw Aquaman with Jason Momoa 2 years ago, whatever, and it was fun. It was meant to be a fun comic booky movie. Cheesy, campy, so cheesy. But I actually loved it. I saw it twice in theaters. I had a good time with it. So they mix and match, but especially after Joker, if you haven't seen Joker with Joaquin Phoenix yet, so good. And if you what they accomplished with Joker was showing that DC's strong suit really lies in character studies and like darker, just a darker, smaller film. It doesn't need to be grandiose. It can literally just be about somebody and you're following their life. And there's so many intricacies because Joker is just packed with detail, and they nailed it. And so now they're going to be kicking off this whole like they're going to call it DC Black Label, where I think Todd Phillips is being tapped to direct another origin story for some villain. I think, but DC Black Label movies, they're essentially going to be smaller character stories. I think. I don't know all the rumors, but it's very exciting. And so my friend Max and I, we were talking a bunch about it, and he's a badass in the Marine Corps and also loves comics. So, it just shows that they're for everybody. And if that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what will. Anyway, a lot to talk about today. I have some things on my outline, and I don't think I'm gonna have time to get to everything. But the main topic of today that I've been meaning to touch on for a while now, because it's something that I struggle with all the time. The topic is envy. And then I got to a point where I was like, maybe envy versus jealousy, what are the differences? And then I did enough research to where I was like, wow, there's so much psychology on this that I had no idea about. And I've actually learned a few things. And I'm glad that I did all this research. Like for the last few nights, I've just been looking at different psychology websites, watching different videos. And I actually feel better after reading these things because I've now found somewhat concrete steps to tackle these things that I've been struggling with for a while. So that's something that I hope to share with you guys today in a somewhat cohesive manner. Some good news of this last week for me. Well, number one, I finished the Netflix show called Hollywood by Ryan Murphy last night. And I got to say, I was a little iffy the first few episodes, but that show I very much liked. And a lot of people think it missed the mark. But I think its final 4 episodes, there are some powerhouse performances in that show. And I think that Ryan Murphy, for those of you that don't know Ryan Murphy, I love and don't love some of his work. He did Glee back in the day, and he's done American Horror Story. In my opinion, I loved the first couple seasons of American Horror Story. Then to me, it got too glittery and for shock value, and there was less substance. Anyway, so he did this show called Hollywood, and I loved it. I finished it last night with my family, and I'm so happy that I watched it. Speaking of Hollywood, the good news that I was talking about is amidst the rent crisis and a lot of people, including myself, being out of work and still being forced to pay rent, essentially, with minimal incomes, my roommate and I reached out to the building manager, and I was like, look, I know everybody's going through a tough time right now, but we are out of work, and we're still paying rent. We're all paid up on rent, and we've been good tenants. We like living in this apartment building. Is there any way that we can lower the rent just a little bit? Because I was researching apartments in LA, and prices are going down right now because there are a lot of unexpected vacancies throughout Los Angeles, to be expected, I guess, in financially difficult times, 100%. And so prices are going down. And so I noticed that there was a unit in my building that is going for $100 cheaper than our place. So I reached out to the management company and I was like, look, at the very least, I know everybody's going through a tough time right now. At the very least, the same apartment is going for $100 less than our apartment. At the very least, can we match that price? Now, could I have like kind of been a dick and been like, we can just leave next month and then you guys are going to have a vacant apartment you're going to have to fill and you're going to have to hire workers to come in and clean and renovate this place and you'll lose a few $1,000s over the next couple months. Could I have been a dick and said that? Yeah. And would I have been fine if I left the apartment? I suppose I could have just like I could just stay here in Orange County, but then it's a whole mix up with it just becomes a whole mess with my roommate. We both want somewhere to go back to because I'm going to be going back to LA this next month to try to get back to normal life, even though the city's still on pause. Anyway, so I just at the very least, can you guys knock down our rent a little bit? And so they agreed. So it was an act of good faith. Was it much? Definitely not. Because, okay, you guys are losing $100 a month compared to what we were paying, but also you have an apartment for that same price down the hall. So good Hollywood news on that front. And you know what? Let's get into it. Let me just take a sip of water and let's get into it. So, envy. Wow, this sounds like so serious. It's something that as I said, I've wanted to talk about for a while because the second I got out of college in 2015, at age 22, and I went to New York City, I left that bubble of being a somewhat big fish in a small pond, right? Wow, voice crack, cool. Right. And then I got to New York City, and immediately the self-comparison started. Because while I was in an enclosed bubble in high school and then on to college, I only had a few people in my class. It was a cutthroat program. We started off with about 60 to 80 students freshman year, and then by the end of sophomore year, they cut it down to 10 students to be in the BFA program. So it was cutthroat. And then because of that, I was like, oh, cool. Like we're the 10 students. These are the ones that I have to compare myself to. And there were so many talented kids at our school. That's a whole other topic, the BFA program and the cutthroat nature of it. There were so many talented people that there's no way you could just cut it down to a class of 10. Anyway, the amount of people I had to compare myself to in college was very minimal, and it was more often than not, I was not in competition with them. So it was like oh, look what that guy did. Look what they did. Look at their great work, their great performance. Good for them. And it was all coming out of a place of love and admiration. The second I got to New York City, I was underwater, like thrashing, like, whoa, so many talented people. I would walk into audition rooms for these open calls, and just the walls were lined with people. The second you walk in, everybody just stares. And it's like you feel like, oh, God, I just got hit with a wall of eyes. And it's awkward, and there are people your age and younger on Broadway, in TV, in films, or on TV, in films. And so immediately my self-comparison started, and it's something that I've struggled with ever since, really. Not really much before that. I think it was once I got to the quote-unquote real world that I started struggling with that, and I know people that are just like baffled. Like one of my best friends, Andre, in New York, who I lived with. He's just like baffled that I don't know if you can hear the dog barking. He's just baffled that I compare myself so hard to people when I don't need to, and it's just something that I have actively been working on and actively been gotten better at. But he's just like such a laid back person, and he knows his place and his path, and he keeps his head down, and he's like, he tells me all about his friends. He's like, yeah, this guy I went to school with, he's in all these movies now, and this other guy is huge on Broadway now, and I'm not upset because that's just their path, and like my path is going somewhere else. And he was very good at like bringing me to a grounded place. but then I would stray away and I would forget. And like same with my acting class, I would, you get wonderful bits of insight and you're like, okay, great. Yeah, I'm in a good place. And then you go back to your life and you forget it instantly. It's like when I was in Arkansas doing Mamma Mia for 3 months in Little Rock, Arkansas. I got to such a great place. I was reading The Power of Now, um, and I got to such a great place of being present. Of like, I have no one to compare myself to. I'm quite literally stuck in Little Rock, Arkansas for 3 months, nowhere to be, just here to do this show. And I wasn't focusing on the future. I wasn't focusing on the past. It was just like this great headspace. And then I got back to New York, and then I fell right back in. I was like, that guy's doing this. That guy's doing this. And like one of the most vivid memories I have. That's dramatic. It's not one of the most vivid memories I have. I have a vivid memory of sitting my first few months in New York. I was sitting on the ground outside of an open call room. Because when I say that these open call rooms in New York City are awkward as hell, I mean it. I hated them. It was like, oh, you just walk in and there's like someone behind a table that's signing people in. You walk in, all the people sitting near the walls on the chairs just look at you, and then you look at them, and then you just like book it straight to the monitor table, and you say really quietly, you're like, "Hi, I'm Brian Whitehill, and I just what time slots are available?" And they have no concept of volume. They don't care. So they're like, "Oh, these, and these," and they're just being super like, "Okay, oh, cool, yeah, of course." And they're like, "Okay, great, headshot resume," and you're like, "Yeah, yeah," and you're like looking around, oh god. And then also like at the same time, okay, if say you sit in there, you got like people giving verbal resumes to their friends that they haven't seen in a long time. They walk in, they're like, "Oh my god, hi! I haven't seen you in forever." And then you that happens like 5 times in the course of 20 minutes because it's like, "What are you up to?" "Oh, well, so I did this show, and then I did this master class with this casting director, and then I did this workshop with so and so from Broadway, and then I took a voice lesson with Jeremy Jordan, and then I'm just about to go on tour with this, and then also," and it's just like, ah, I don't have to hear your verbal resume. At the same time, I get it. These are people that they haven't seen in a while, and like I had occasional moments like that where I would walk in and see someone I knew, and it was like, "Oh my god, wow, I haven't seen you in a long time," or "I did a tour with you. Holy crap, it's been forever." I get it, but that's why I wore headphones. So I got to avoid those things because when you're about to audition, I don't know, you got to get in the zone. And I was the guy that just like wanted to block everybody out. I wanted to go in, do my job, sing a song or do the monologue, and then peace out. And then go back uptown to my apartment and possibly get ready for work or whatever. Anyway, I remember sitting on the ground outside this audition room, and Ben Platt walks by, and I'm sitting down. I'm looking up, and Ben Platt walks by. He didn't notice me, um, but he was rehearsing for Dear Evan Hansen. Now, for those of you who don't know anything about Ben Platt or Dear Evan Hansen or musical theater in general, that's okay. I didn't know much either, especially when I got to New York, especially when I talked to my musical theater friends, and they're like, "Oh my God, I love that Sondheim show." And I'm like, "Which one?" And they're like, "You don't know this one?" And I'm like, "I don't know much Sondheim." And they go, "Ah?" And I go, I know. My first show was Rent, and I didn't do a whole lot of research, and I've only done X, Y, and Z shows. I did take theater history, but it's like if you don't worship Sondheim in musical theater, you're banished. So that's me. So for those of you that don't know musical theater that well, Ben Platt was in Dear Evan Hansen, and Dear Evan Hansen was a very big Broadway show. Ben Platt was also in Pitch Perfect, the Pitch Perfect movies. He was in a Netflix show also by Ryan Murphy, pre-Hollywood show called The Politician. What else was he in? He was in Will and Grace for a little while. He was in The Book of Mormon on Broadway, which was written by the creators of South Park. The Book of Mormon, fantastic show. And also shout out to my friend Luke Monday, who was recently in the national tour of Book of Mormon. He's not listening, but that's okay. We're going to shout out anyway. So Ben Platt walked by, and I just remember comparing myself so hard to him because I think I was 22 at the time, and I want to say he was 23, something like that. He won the Tony that year for Dear Evan Hansen, and I remember watching, just being like, that guy is my age, and he's already won a Tony. What am I doing? And it was just like this not good envy. And I've had that with many people. For instance, even on this show, The Politician on Netflix, but now in that show Hollywood, there's this very good actor named David Corn Sweat, Corin Sweat, I think, and good actor, good looking guy, and I find myself comparing myself to him because I'm like, that guy's my age, I could play that role, damn. And so I remember just like having this not great envy towards Ben Platt, and then I also went down this rabbit hole of being upset that I didn't have connections into the industry. To give you context and to explain the jealousy there, Ben Platt's dad, Mark Platt, is a very big producer. He produced La La Land and he produced Book of Mormon on Broadway. He's produced a number of things that I can't think of right now, nor am I going to list them all off, even if I could think of them. And so that got me down the rabbit hole of like, wow, well, okay, great. He never, I mean, because look, and this is no shade towards him, it's just he never had to sit in an open call room to get into Book of Mormon. When your dad's the producer of this Broadway show and you miraculously end up in the Broadway show, I highly doubt you were sitting in that room full of other guys staring you down, hoping to be seen, hoping to go in and sing 16 to 32 bar cuts. I went in for the show on Broadway, I think, and I didn't even get to audition because they typed me out, which means that they took everybody's headshots, they looked through them, and then they chose a certain stack of people to stay. So like everyone my whole life, they were like, oh my God, you got to go in for Book of Mormon. And I was like, okay, great. I will, maybe, sure. And I go in and the first thing that happens, they're like, okay, these people can stay. Everyone else, bye. And I was just like, oh, great, cool. I just sat here for 3 hours to be told that I'm not going to even get to do anything. This is fun. So that sense of like not like negative envy really kicked in. And then that's when I slowly started realizing that, and this is not anything new, a lot of people know this, that a lot of people in the industry, successful folks, were born into it or had major connections. And there's no use getting upset about that because it's nothing new. And also, it's a wonderful thing when the person with said connections actually has the talent to back it up. Because Ben Platt is an example of that. He's a fantastic singer. He nailed it in Dear Evan Hansen. He's a great actor. And so at least he has the talent to back up the opportunities that he's been given. But still, at the time, I just remember comparing myself so hard. And so that is the perfect example of my level of envy that I've struggled with. And then especially since moving to LA, where I'm working at these fancy houses, where I'm literally like, whether it's a producer's house, a director's house, a famous actor's house, I'm seeing these big time people in Hollywood and I'm seeing their teenage kids socialize with names that like most people would kill to even talk to. And I'm like, you are a teenager talking to J.J. Abrams. That's crazy. And you're just growing up around these people. So the day that you turn 20 and you're like, hey, Dad, I want to be an actor just like you. Or I want to be an actor just like your friend Leo, whoever. And then it's like, great, I'll get you in contact with the right people. And then off they go. And that is nothing new. And I beat myself up so much, so needlessly for it. And what's the point? And so thankfully, this is something that I've gotten better with. It's just hard when you're surrounded by it. It really is. And a lot of people have gotten very good at blocking it out. I, unfortunately, for the longest time, was not good at that. But now I'm getting a grip on it, which I'm very happy about. Because now I can roll into these places and be like, you know what? They were born into a certain set of advantages, just like I was in a different way. You know, there's so many things I can be grateful for and advantages that I've had in life outside of the industry that have led me to where I am now, that I should be grateful for those things. And someone else could very easily be like, wow, look at that guy and everything that he, all the advantages he's had. And they could have that negative view towards me. But again, that this is my path and that's their path and that's Ben Platt's path. So, so I have this whole thing, and I because of all this, I was like, I was just gonna go on a rant and talk about like, well, like I struggle with this stuff. It sucks, but I looked it up, and I was so surprised by the amount of psychology behind it that I wanted to share it with you guys. I thought that it might actually be useful to some people, other than myself, because it actually did help me. So I'm gonna take another sip of water. So I looked up jealousy versus envy. And I always thought that they were kind of the same thing. I do think they go hand in hand, but it's interesting because a lot of definitions differentiate them. For instance, true jealousy by definition is a reaction to the threat of losing something you have. Envy, however, arises when you find yourself lacking something someone else has. So I tried to like brainstorm what that meant and like what the situations call for, which situations call for jealousy and which mean that it's envy. And I realized that actually a lot of in my situation, a lot of the time it's both. But the only thing I could really think of is like if someone's jealous, like if someone's a jealous partner, jealous significant other, and they see like their, if a guy sees his girlfriend talking to another guy, if he's jealous of that guy, it's because he's afraid of losing what he has to that guy. Like that's the only thing that came to mind for me. But then I started thinking, I was like, okay, in a weird spiral type way, when I saw this guy David Cornsweet just nail it in these shows, in my head, well, number one, there was envy. There was like, damn, what a great place he's in, and he's doing great work. I would love to be in that place. So envy, but it went hand in hand with jealousy of subconsciously me thinking he's taking a role from me. No, he he didn't take anything from me. That was his. That was his role. Nothing was taken from me, but for some reason jealousy kicks in, and I'm like, nah, like I could do that. That should have been mine, and he took it. No, he didn't. So that's like the weird negative spiral my head goes to. It also doesn't help that I worked a Calvin, no, I forget what event it was. It was some retail event on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. And I was passing out bags of candy to kids. And then David Cornsweet walked in looking great. And all the paparazzi were taking photos of him. And then he moved on and he seemed like a very nice guy. And then the next heartthrob actor or somebody walked in after. So that didn't help because I'm like, cool, cool, cool. Anyway, here's some candy, kids. So I realized that a lot of times envy and jealousy actually go hand in hand. But then I kind of got on this track of how do we turn envy into something positive? And I just found a lot of interesting things, and I wanted to share them. For instance, there are some psychologists, they say that envy helps you pinpoint what's really important to you. So, you see someone in a particular place, and if that's a place you want to be in, it can motivate you to work harder and come from a positive place with that. Let me see what else I wrote here. Someone wrote, most of the time, what I thought were feelings of jealousy were actually envy, a strong, strong desire to be in the position of someone else, to have something, to do something, to be something. But in a positive way, envy is a call to action. It's a set of clues about what we should do next, And so that was one of the positive steps that you can take towards turning envy in a positive light, is like come up with concrete steps. Okay, you see someone at a certain rung in the ladder or a certain step on the staircase in front of you, come up with concrete steps to, plan out that direction. If that's a similar place you want to be in, okay, how do you get there? Rather than just sitting there and moping like I've done in the past, being like, I'm not there yet. Correct. You are where you're supposed to be. And if you work for it, you'll progress. And the only person you should be, and again, you hear so many inspirational messages all the time, like comparison is the thief of joy. Never compare. It's just like, we know these things. We know we're not supposed to compare ourselves, yet we do because it's natural. It's human. It's part of our psychology. It's part of our freaking evolution as humans to compare and contrast and level up and compare resources and all that stuff. So it's just we hear this stuff and how we're not supposed to, but it's so easy to fall into, and I too often do. But another cool thing was someone said that it's envy's fragments of a future self trying to break through. I thought that was so cool. That's a really interesting picture to paint. But the really interesting part of this that I found was that there's different types of envy, and I have a feeling most of you didn't know this, and for those of you that did, 100% congratulations, because I didn't know this. But there's benign envy versus malicious envy, and it's so cool because apparently, and this is what a lot of psychologists talk about, and this literally makes me want to read all about this, and I probably will. Maybe I'll buy a book on it. If I ever do, I'll let you guys know what book it is and what I think of it. But so benign envy promotes the idea, voice crack, benign envy promotes the idea that change is possible, whereas malicious envy promotes helplessness and feeling like the other person has an advantage they don't deserve. One builds up and the other tears down. Does that sound familiar? Yes, it does. Because when I'm at these fancy houses, and that's the thing, I don't envy possessions. Occasionally when I see someone my age, or, oh God, growing up in Newport Beach, it's like when I would be driving around in my Saturn, again, lucky to even have a car. Didn't think a lot about it at the time when I'm surrounded by BMWs, and I was in a 2004 Saturn Ion. I would get kind of caught up with the idea of possessions. Thankfully, I fell out of it and realized like that's not important. Like when I would see, like even visiting back from college, I'd be 19 coming back home to visit in my Saturn Ion, and like some 15-year-old or 16-year-old in a really nice BMW would pull up next to me, and I would just be like, wow, don't like that. But again, just such a bad headspace to be in. But ever since then, I've thankfully separated myself from that. There was this guy, oh my God. There was this guy when I was in high school. I got a Vizio TV one year for Christmas. My mom got me a 32-inch Vizio TV. Now, Vizio is kind of like actually, they've gotten really so much better. But at the time, they were like kind of just like a step under the big fancy brands. Good TVs, but like kind of the more approachable brand, which was totally fine. I got a TV. So I remember posting that on Facebook, and this guy, who was it? This guy, Ned, comments on that, and he goes, huh, yeah, you got a 32-inch Vizio TV? I got a 32-inch Samsung. And if that doesn't paint the picture of the toxic Newport Beach culture that is possible by filthy rich kids, I don't know what does. So it was like those little digs occasionally, but thankfully I was surrounded by a lot of good people, and most people at my high school were not like that. Thankfully, they were not the type of people to rub their possessions in other people's faces. It's just that when someone would, I would be like, wow, that is super rude. Thankfully, I don't really care about that stuff anymore. Someone my age can drive by with a Lamborghini, and I'll be like, wow, congrats. You are racing from stop sign to stop sign. Woohoo! So yeah, possessions, that's one thing. But like, yeah, I still struggle with I guess you would say malicious envy. When I walk into a nice place and I see all these people talking with the higher ups, and I'm like, dude, you have no idea like how big it is that you're talking with this guy. So the idea of benign envy versus malicious envy. So what is it? Benign envy had significant positive correlation with motivation of hope for success, and malicious envy had significant positive correlation with motivation of fear of failure. And that's also another thing I struggle with, fear of failure. I look at the unstable career path and the creative industries, and I'm like, man, what if it doesn't work out? Because, it's a tough business. But why go down that road when I have no idea where my path is going to lead? I have no idea what opportunities could show up literally tomorrow. whether it leads me down the path of acting or something else that I love or some type of platform that is to me equally inspiring, why worry about that? Why fear the failure? If anything, you should welcome it because it'll bring on learning, you know? It's like it took me so long living in New York. It took me a few years to realize, oh, I'm actually not as interested in theater as I wanted or as I thought I was. So I look back and I'm like, why did I waste my time in New York? And it's actually, no, I didn't waste my time. I made some of the best friends of my life. I got training in theater. I toured the country. So we just have all these places, these negative places our mind can go. And thankfully, I've been working to keep myself out of that. I mean, we all do. But yeah, so it's interesting that malicious envy is heavily correlated with the motivation of fear of failure. What does it say? If one person, oh yeah, see, if one person tends to have higher levels of benign envy, that person also tends to focus on the positive aspect of the advantages of the envied person, rather than trying to tear them down. So it's like your benign envy, amongst all the psychologists online and everything, they refer to it as the one where it's more admiration and motivating, because it promotes a hope and it promotes a work ethic. It says, but how can we promote benign envy in ourselves when we are frustrated by another person's superiority? One key is to cultivate a mindset that change is actually possible, rather than focusing on all the things that we don't have. Rather than focusing on all the things that we don't have that block self-improvement, dwell on those things over which we have control. I love that. And also, not only the things that we have control over, but the things that we can be grateful for. It's a whole other conversation to have about gratitude, but that was another rabbit hole I went down last night. Like the way to combat malicious envy and the self-comparison truly is just being grateful. It's like me years ago being like, oh, I have a Saturn Ion and that guy's got a BMW, when then realizing I should have been going to bed being like, amazing, I have a car, because there's other 16-year-old, or like 17, I think I was 17 when I got my first car. There's other 17-year-olds who don't have cars. Like that's, and the Saturn Ion, what did I name him? It wasn't Dwight. It was just like the most bare bones car you've ever seen. There was a CD player. It was a stick shift. I know how to drive stick shift. That's a dying skill. But it was a car and it worked. And for some reason, I would still see like people with Audis and all this stuff and just like feel inferior. I think I got over that at some point when I became friends with people who were on a similar playing field, or who had, if they had a nicer car, they just didn't flaunt it. And that stuff is just so frivolous. But as a high schooler growing up in that world, it was interesting. But there's a study here that it was an experiment that I want to read this little passage from it. And what was it? It was so essentially there was a study where these students, they read a story about a high achieving scientist, and half the group read a story that kind of painted the scientist in a light of he worked his way to get there. And then the other half read a story that kind of painted the scientist in a light of he had a lot of advantages and connections to get to where he got. And so it like either motivated them or didn't. So it says, students in the study read about a high achieving scientist. The details of his life story primed either incremental beliefs about how achievements come about, suggesting that avocals, Brian, get with it, dude. Get with it. I'm going to restart this sentence because even I'm not understanding myself. So, all these students, they read about this scientist. Maybe I can dumb this down. The details of his life story primed either as incremental beliefs about how achievements come about with persistent effort, or quote unquote entity beliefs, suggesting that inherited traits and being in the right circumstance determined success. So when the students read about another, Oh, I see. When the students then read about another high achieving person, this time another student, those in the first group felt more benign positive envy than those in the second group. Furthermore, those students also indicated that they planned to put more hours into studying. So essentially, the first half that read, this scientist got to where he is because he worked for it and it was persistent effort and he climbed that ladder. He pushed that boulder up the hill, baby. They went on to be like, oh, wow, I need to put more hours into studying. I need to put more effort in. Not in a negative way, but just like, okay, cool, I can be doing more, I think. And I have hope and motivation towards pursuing what I want. Whereas the second group who read that, oh, well, this guy was just in the right place at the right time, he had the right connections, he had the right circumstance, those people were less motivated. And so I think that all of us find ourselves in those two groups at any given time. We see, that's why I used to love watching interviews with high achieving people who gave the steps that they took to get to where they are. Because I'm like, dude, so cool. Like, wow, you were fired at age 24 and then you had a setback and you were kind of depressed for like a year and a half trying to figure out things, and then you had another setback, but then you came back from, like, when you read those resilient stories, you're like, oh yes, I'm motivated. But then when you hear, I don't want to name any names, but when you just hear like, oh yeah, well, it makes sense that that person's son or daughter got right into that opportunity because that's their mom or dad. And like, it was just so, when we see those where it just like, okay, they didn't have to work that hard, you feel more negative emotions toward it, and you feel probably less, well, in the study it showed it, but you would feel less motivation to work as hard because you're like, what's the point if there's people out there that just like are in the right place at the right time, right circumstances, they didn't have to work as hard. So I think that we all find ourselves in those two groups, and I think it's a matter of finding the balance between those two things. And I want to do so much more research on it, but there's not enough time to talk all about this stuff in under an hour. But I just think those are really interesting concepts, and also just being grateful for what you have. Because even if you see someone and I'm speaking on myself, if I see someone, like, for instance, I love the actor Chris Pine, but then I read his story, and also he did train, and he went, if I'm not mistaken, Chris Pine from Star Trek and a variety of other things that I've seen, I don't want to list them all. He trained at ACT in San Francisco, if I'm not mistaken, and that's a grad school for acting, again, if I'm not mistaken. But then I did read how he got his first like big agent from his dad, who was on a big TV show. So then in my head, I immediately went to, well, he didn't have to work that hard, when really he had trained. It just so happened that, great, he had the right circumstance, and then he also had the talent to back it up, and good for him. He's not taking anything away from me. And there's millions of other stories like that all throughout time in all industries. So why waste the negative energy in your mind somewhat discrediting somebody when you could be letting it motivate you just to better yourself? And you shouldn't even really be comparing paths regardless, because again, all different paths. So this to me is just really interesting stuff. So I have two things left about it, and then I found 4 concrete steps to help envy motivate us and to turn it into something positive as opposed to just letting it consume us. And I wrote. Oh no, someone else wrote. And it says, and so when we feel envy, thinking incrementally about things we can do to improve ourselves may steer us toward benign envy and its constructive effects. And then, so these 4 steps that I found, and this was written, these are things pulled from, the references here are, I want to say these guys are psychologists, but they wrote scientific journals, 2009, 2011, and 2012. These guys with the last names Van de Ven, Zeelenberg, and Peters. One of them, one of the studies is called Leveling Up and Down. The other one's called When Envy Outperforms Admiration. And the other one is called Appraisal Patterns of Envy and Related Emotions. And that's our ad break. So they wrote, below are 4 ways to move through envy to motivation. And I love these. And again, these are all, I'm just so glad I did this research because it actually motivates me to be in a more positive headspace when when I'm ever seeing anybody in a position that I would love to be in. I would love to get to a place where and I am, but I would like to continue working towards a place where I view them constructively. So these 4 ways. Number 1, compare mindfully. So if you compare yourself to others, do so with the intention of improving yourself rather than bringing others down. Focus on similar others and realistic goals. When you compare, notice urges to complain or gossip. Notice thoughts about whether or not you can change your situation, because more often than not you can. And when you fall into a place where you're thinking you can't, then that's a very bad place to be in, and you got to change course. Be mindful of your inner critic without believing every word it says. Good Lord, ain't that the truth? Because that was a big thing in Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, where what's it called? Observing the thinker, where you just have to neutrally observe the voice in your own head. And are we getting into real deep psychology stuff? Is that what this podcast's for? I don't know. It is today. But observing the thinker, where you observe that voice in your head that's telling you can't do things, just observe it neutrally and be like, why is that voice talking that way? What's going on? So that was number 1, compare mindfully. Number 2, compliment. As research suggests, complimenting the target of your comparison is beneficial to you. Discover what you like about this person. Compliment their hard work, because they did do hard work. Whatever their circumstance is or was to get whatever opportunity, chances are if they're still in a successful place, it means they're still working hard. So complimenting the target of your comparison. You may feel more inspired to make a change for yourself when you view the other person as deserving and in control of what they have. They deserve it. Why not? Who says that they don't deserve it? You? Why? Why, Brian? That's number 2. Number 3, focus on concrete steps. Perceived control over your situation goes a long way towards motivation. Identify the steps that will take you from watcher to doer, from watching from afar to doing it yourself. For instance, with this podcast, for the longest time, I would watch people's and listen to people's podcasts, and I would always be like, I feel like I have some things I would want to say, or stories I'd want to share, or people I'd want to talk to, but I don't know. I don't know if I could ever start with something like that. And I just kind of had to hit a point where I was like, let's do it. Why not? What do I have to lose? Whole lot of nothing. Identify the steps that will take you from watcher to doer. If whatever it is you want seems like it's too far out of reach, break it down further into smaller steps. So simple. And that's why they say to journal too. I need to get more back into that too. More back into that. Is that proper grammar? Maybe. Like steering a ship, it is the small adjustments that help you reach your destination. And also, side note, there was a really good comparison yesterday I read somewhere, and I'm going to butcher it. Someone said comparing yourself to someone else is like it's like comparing yourself on a jog and you see someone pass you up, a faster jogger next to you, and you all of a sudden look inward and you go, "Oh, I'm not that good of a runner," or "Oh, they're in better shape," or this or that. When really you have no idea where that person is in their run. For all you know, if you're on your second mile and you're huffing and puffing after 2 miles, like myself, I go 2 miles. That's it. That's all for me. And that's all I did today. 1 mile in the Murph. If you're on your second mile and you're slowing down and then someone passes you up, sure, you could look at them and be like, wow, that person's such a better runner than I am. How do you know they didn't start 100 feet ago and they got that big old burst of energy and they're blasting some Fall Out Boy and sprinting? You don't know where they started. You don't know if they've been training for weeks now for a marathon. There's just so many factors you don't know about the other person on that jog. And the jog is a metaphor for life. And that's that. Now, step number 4, know when to stop. While there's nothing wrong with achieving your goals, constant comparison to others can take its toll on you. If you find yourself consumed with perfectionism or malicious envy, take a step back from the situation. Appreciate what you have, Gratitude, 100%. I need to get better at that. So much to be grateful for, seriously. Acknowledge your skills. Reassess whether your comparison and expectations are realistic. I like that, because also it's like with someone else with this such a different path, you can't expect your path to look anything like theirs. And using myself as an example, and also someone else did say, they were like, focus on everything that's different with your path, so you don't try to emulate so hard, because chances are your path is already so different than that person. When they were at this age, they were doing this, and you were somewhere else doing something else. There's no way for your paths to perfectly line up, so why compare them? Like I can look at my time and be like, oh, I spent a year on the road. Sure, someone else was in LA at the time while I was in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Someone in LA was like filming a short film that got them somewhere else. Like, there's just so many factors. There's no point. There's no point in negative self-comparison, which leads to malicious envy. So to recap these 4 steps that I found beneficial: compare mindfully, compliment, focus on concrete steps, and know when to stop comparing. And that's that. That's the 4 ways to benefit from envy. So thank you to those psychologists who studied those. Who published those scientific journals. Because I'm telling you, I went down this rabbit hole and it was super beneficial. So I hope that all of those, even if it was just hearing my experiences, I hope that helped somebody somewhere. And maybe it did, maybe it didn't. And I also hope that you learned something, because that, to me, hearing benign envy versus malicious envy and all that, I was like, I've never even heard these terms before, but it makes perfect sense. And there was so much more in there that I could have talked about, I suppose. But I hope that this was cohesive in some way. And someone else did say, as a final thing to encapsulate everything, I made a note of this, and it says, when you see someone else moving forward fearless. No, I got to restart that, because this sentence needs to be perfect and read perfectly in this moment. When you see someone else moving forward fearlessly through the blur, it means you can too. They're on their path, not knowing what's next, moving fearlessly, hopefully, through that blur. You can do it too. And also, it's something to admire when someone just goes big, and is bold. Bold, huh? Boulder uphill. So I think we're going to wrap this up, everybody. Thank you for listening. And a big thank you to everybody who has gone on Apple Podcasts and rated and reviewed the show, because every rating helps the show and helps the podcast reach more listeners. Big shout out to the anonymous person who gave a 1-star review. I disagree, but I respect your opinion. I think that this podcast is at least worth 3 stars, at the very least. At the very most and most accurately, it's worth 5 stars. But still, shout out to that person. I respect your opinion. I disagree, respectfully. So thank you to everybody who's given all the positive feedback. I appreciate it all. And I've just had a lot of people reach out to me and tell me what they thought and that they've enjoyed the show, which is all I want. Again, just want this conversation, and I hope that you took something away from this today. Is every episode going to be educational in any way? Do I know what I'm talking about? No, but I'm glad that I looked things up and learned something. So I think that's all we have today. Good old envy versus jealousy, benign versus malicious, all the good stuff. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else, but there's not. So I'm going to see you guys next week. Episodes are now being posted on Wednesdays, a nice little midweek, the little hump day, little hill of the week. And that's where we're going to be, right at that hill. So I'm going to see you guys next week. Again, subscribe on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. The video podcast is on YouTube. And that's all. That's all we got today, guys. So keep moving keep moving forward fearlessly through that blur, huh? Stay bold. Keep climbing. And I'll see you guys next week.